Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. On today's show we have a serving police detective who is also a UFO researcher. He spoke recently at the UK Exopolitics conference in Leeds and is soon to be speaking on a lecture tour in Denmark for the Danish Exopolitics group. We are here in West Yorkshire in late October and we've decided to brave the weather and come outside and conduct the interview here. So welcome, Gary.
Good morning to you.
Now then, I mentioned there the Exopolitics conference at which we both spoke in August 2011. Now your talk was all about the Rendlesham Forest incident, which we spoke about last time. Can you, first off, because we're going to discuss a little bit of the politics behind the Rendlesham case, because there's quite a lot of...
And there are a lot of politics.
Firstly, can you give us the salient points, as briefly as you can, the timeline of events and who the key witnesses were?
Okay. Basically, after 4 years of research, having met Colonel Holt, who was then the Deputy Base Commander of the base in 1980 when the incidents occurred, I've collaborated with him and I've done an evidential review, and that's what my talk was, basically through police eyes and evidential review. The key salient points of that we can establish after 30 years is that there were 3 successive nights of UFO activity. On the first night, principally, there was a UFO seen that was then tracked through the forest and then was seen to be on the ground, i.e. a landed UFO. 2 officers approached that craft, one of which actually touched it, which is Sergeant Jim Penniston, and he made numerous drawings, was around the craft for many minutes, detailed drawings. The second significant night is less well known, but I'm now happy to believe that that is corroborated. A number of officers have come forward in the last 2 or 3 years to corroborate that the second night occurs, and this involves in a Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin, who was out on mobile patrol when she has an encounter with a UFO, which is so frightening to her that she has to be relieved from duty and take time off. The third night is perhaps the most famous night, because this is the night that involves Colonel Holt, where the UFOs return and he takes a team of specialist officers out with him. They track UFO through the forest, where it then divides into 5 more silent UFOs that disappear. Then multiple UFOs are seen off the base, near the base, and eventually UFOs shine a beam down at their feet, the group of 5 airmen, including Holt, before one of the UFOs is then later seen and corroborated via other people in the radar in the weapon storage tower, that beams were being shone directly into the weapon storage area, which I can confirm is a nuclear storage facility.
Right. Now, recently I saw a new UFO film by Leslie Keane, I think it is, and Holt gave his testimony in that film, and he actually drew a picture of the UFO that he witnessed, which was different to what Penniston witnessed.
Absolutely.
Now, I think you can get that on the net. I think it's called Secret Access UFOs. Very good documentary if you want to look that one up. Now, okay, when we were at this Exopolitics conference, you gave your talk on Rendlesham, all of the evidence, etc., etc., and then I think it was just after your talk, someone taps me on the shoulder and hands me a copy of the Daily Telegraph, and there's a big article all about Rendlesham. The commander of the base, i.e. Holt's boss,
Ted Conrad,
Ted Conrad, has come forward and he's making statements, basically negative statements, I guess, not having spoken publicly about this event for, how long is it, 41 years?
30 years.
30 years. 30 years. And that was quite a coincidence that it was at the same time as the Exopolitics conference. But tell us what was said in that article and what your reaction to it was?
Well, basically, I was surprised, although nothing surprises me in the UFO world and the way the media portray this subject after 9 years of research.
Yeah.
But basically, he did a very negative article saying that after 31 years, he'd finally agreed to speak, and basically he said there was nothing to it, and kind of like just trivialised what went on. He said that something went on, but he didn't really think it'd amount to anything. He didn't really say anything of note, it was just generalisations. Well, that obviously made a lot of newspapers, and in fact it pretty much makes all the newspapers. Anything to do with Rendlesham that is of a negative angle seems to just go around the internet and on newspaper websites like wildfire. But actually the best evidence about Rendlesham rarely ever gets a mention, and there's an irony there which I think we'll touch on a bit later. But just to clear up the matter, I know from my collaboration with Colonel Holt that actually Ted Conrad, his memory perhaps is somewhat a bit elusive, because it was actually Ted Conrad that was there on the same night, the Christmas party, when Holt is told that the UFO's back. Well, Ted Conrad was there when that was told, my Bruce, Lieutenant Bruce England. And it was actually Conrad who said to Holt, I want you to go out and sort this out once and for all. So he was the one who actually instructed Holt to go out and assemble a team and get out there. But interestingly, from Colonel Holt, he says that there was a chat with a Major Ziegler, who was the head of the security police aspect, and the Office of Special Investigations, which is like the CID of the US Air Force Police. And he was actually involved in a conversation with Conrad, who then approaches Holt and says, we would like you to take Sergeant Ball with you as well. And Holt says, okay.
Right.
So it would strike me that Ted Conrad's recollections perhaps are not quite as accurate as they could be.
Right. Now, why would he suddenly make a statement not having spoken out for all this time? I mean, they've clearly dragged him out of retirement to make this statement. I mean, have you spoke to Holt about it, and what does Holt think about it?
Well, I have spoken to Holt about it, and he has his own thoughts, which he, I think, went to great lengths to address at the time, to actually counter what he'd said, and he more or less said what I've said, that he's got a short memory. But I think that's better for Holt to say it. Suffice to say that we both are of the opinion that for some reason, I don't think it's particularly a coincidence that Conrad came out with his comments just at the time when I am actually making an evidential review through my experience as a police officer, showing you the best evidence. It seems more than a coincidence to me that suddenly we have something negative to counter the positive aspect that I'm portraying to the subject.
One of the ways that mainstream has tried to explain Rendlesham is that all of these airmen, and I think there were over 50, witnessed lights, 3 of whom witnessed it at close quarters, and then there was airmen witnessed other UFOs on different nights, that they were witnessing a lighthouse. Now, there was a very good slide that you had in your talk, I remember, where you gave all of the different reasons why it can't be a lighthouse. Can you just, for the benefit of the viewer, just go through that list, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, for anybody who actually looks at the case in any depth and looks at the testimony and what is out there and what people have said consistently on camera since it became public in the early 80s, is that the debunkers have always said it's a lighthouse. And this is where you get into this very murky area of media manipulation. Because I do, after 9 years of research, I do have to conclude that there is definitely a negative bias towards UFOs in the media. If we can trivialise it, let's write a piece trivialising it. Rarely does consistent investigative reporting be done on factual events. Now, a case in point is when we talk about the lighthouse theory. There must have been probably 30 or 40 major television documentaries made during the last 26 years since it became public, really in 83 onwards. And virtually in every one, the programmers are given a lot of time to the lighthouse theory that was expanded very early on by certain negative skeptics who didn't actually, to my mind, look at the actual evidence of what people said.
And you're a serving detective, so
I should know what evidence is. And so I think that when I look at evidence, I'm looking at it through police eyes on what is evidential. The fact that I have pro-UFO views is regardless. I can take myself out of that and look at and call it as it is, whether it's a piece of evidence that stands up or not. And that's what I have done to the Rendlesham case. And what I do plan to do at some point is to send all of the evidential review in a more detailed form to all the national newspapers and TV. But that's another issue. But in addressing this particular point, you have to look at the testimony of the people that were there and what is there. Now, the skeptics talk in generalisations. That's the classic thing that Stanton Friedman's been saying for many, many years. And it's absolutely true that the, as he would call it, the noisy negativists come out with stories that are never, ever countenanced or challenged, because the media don't have a Jeremy Paxman type figure who knows what's what about the subject to actually say, well, actually, you're wrong about that. You said that in that year. And unfortunately, we don't have that kind of referee that will arbit for us. But in the lighthouse theory, there are certain points that I wanted to make at the lecture. So I think it's useful now. I'm going to read out, I think there's 13 or 14 points as to why it can't be the lighthouse. And this is based on the actual evidence of the case. The first one, does Penniston, which is Sergeant Penniston, and John Burrows, the airman officer with him, does their descriptions of the landed object match the lighthouse? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the moving lights seen from multiple witnesses from the east gate on the first night? No. Does the lighthouse explain the aerial objects seen by Penniston and Burrows as they walked back to the base, i.e. in the opposite direction of the lighthouse? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the objects seen moving over the trees and later descending into them by various officers on the second night? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the objects seen by Lieutenant Bonnie Ray Tamplin on the second night that so frightened her that she had to be taken from duty? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the landing indentations found by Burrows and Penniston on the first night? No. Does the lighthouse explain the increased radiation levels found at the landing site? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain the objects seen by Holt and his team that was low to the ground on the left side of the farmhouse across the farmer's field? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain how the same object silently divided into 5 different objects as described by Holt and his team of men? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain how later on multiple objects, i.e. 5, were seen in groups north and south of the base where Holt's team were? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain how one of those objects moved from the south to hover directly above Holt's team and cast down what can only be described as a laser beam type of light at their feet just inches from them? Answer, no. Does the lighthouse explain how Holt and his team witness an object over the base casting a beam down to the ground when it's seen in the opposite direction to the lighthouse? Answer, no. And finally, does the lighthouse explain the clear movements as described by Holt on his dictaphone recording of the live event as it actually happened? Answer, no.
Right. Can I add one, Gary?
Yeah, go on.
Is the BBC talking shit on its website when it tries to pass the UFO off as a lighthouse?
Absolutely.
Answer.
Ludicrous.
Yes.
Yes. You know, and that is not me being clever.
Yeah.
That's just me applying what has evidentially been said by multiple people that corroborate each other of the events. Now, you don't need to be a genius to do this. But where I think we have to draw attention to this is that investigative journalists and documentary teams that should be able to think of those same points, if they actually look at the evidence properly, why none of those have ever brought those points onto screen in any major documentary in the last 27 years.
Now, this Conrad guy, who was the head of the base, presumably he must have been asked to take part in some of these documentaries and presumably has said no.
Well, I can't speak for him, but as I'm led to believe, he's never really given any kind of major interview about it, and I just find it incredibly coincidental that he should make this comment so many years after the event, 31 years in fact, when it coincides with a major UFO conference in Leeds where I'm about to give what is perhaps the most key evidential review so far.
And there were, we've had other articles with other debunking theories.
Absolutely.
There was the manure truck story.
Kevin Cond and the police car roving around in the forest.
Manure truck on fire, that was the UFO.
The manure. I mean, but this is absolutely classic. And I think we will touch on later an article that was printed in the Sun, which I've got a copy of, so I want to be accurate on what I'm saying, where it clearly illustrates to me how there is a dumbing down of this subject.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about the Sun and the article that that was published in the Sun about the exopolitics
the day after the conference finished.
But before we go to the break, Gary, and before we talk about that article in the Sun, let's just touch on some of the other speakers that were at the exopolitics conference.
Yep.
Because, you know, there were, I think, something like 18 speakers or something like that. There was a lot of speakers.
3 days, full days.
3 full days of lectures on the UFO and related subjects. I mean, there was a couple there, a Muslim couple, the wife who had an abduction experience, and there's actually footage, alleged footage of her basically disappearing from the bed. I mean, you know, to give a snapshot of that conference, we had Robbie Graham, who was talking about basically Hollywood's manipulation and the CIA's involvement of, you know, films, and the fact that they change the scripts in films that portray
when it's UFO related.
When it's UFO related.
Yeah. Richard Dolan talking about After Disclosure. Bryce Seibel, who was with him, have written a new book called After Disclosure, AD Disclosure.
Yeah. Stephen Bassett, who's leading the
exopolitic movement.
Yeah, the campaign.
It goes all around the world, the campaign to raise the awareness.
Yeah. Ian Crane, who's the guy with a chap called Max Burns, who's investigated the Sheffield UFO incident. So the Exopolitics conference, it's in the UK, started 2 years ago. So this was the 3rd one. I've been to all 3 of them, and you know they've grown. It's grown every year. So I think there were 300 people at the latest one. Yeah. So it has become the UK's biggest UFO conference
for many years, since Graham Birdsall used to do his with UFO magazine, but sadly he passed away and that lapsed. But now Anthony's doing a fantastic job in resurrecting the conference at Leeds, and it's getting bigger and better every year.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Gary, we're going to go for a short break, and we'll be talking about the Sun after this. Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary Heseltine, who is a detective constable and he's also a UFO researcher. Now, we were talking about the Sun newspaper, Gary, which you know, a lot of people ridicule it, but it is the most widely read newspaper in the UK.
It is. It is.
So it's influencing millions of people's lives.
Absolutely.
And they wrote a report on the Exopolitics conference, and you're going to just mention that article first, Gary. Okay.
Well, interestingly enough, whilst we were at the conference over the 3 days, and I'll just pad it out and say that over 3 days there were lectures that were basically going on from 9 in the morning and sometimes till 10 at night. So we had a lot of major speakers from all over the world, many of them giving up-to-date analysis of the latest and best UFO evidence. So in that context you have a major UFO conference. It's actually the largest UFO conference in Britain and probably Europe. So this is the gravity of what's there, and some of the world's top experts are there. We had a Sun reporter there, I think, over 2 of the 3 days. And in fact, I spoke to the lady who wrote the article and did probably about a 40-minute interview with her.
Really? I mean, Anthony asked me if I wanted to be interviewed, and I just said, no, thank you, not the Sun. No.
Well, I take the opposite view, that I know that the subject will be trivialised, because that's the way the media treat it, but we have to try in our own way to give them the time to prove that they will trivialise it.
Right.
So in a sense, rather than acquiesce, I'll play ball, because then I'll use it to my advantage and say, well, I did a 40-minute interview, I talked about what is Britain's most famous case, widely regarded now as probably the 2nd most famous case after Roswell in the entire world, and that I've just done an evidential review, and she's asking me all the right questions, and I'm giving her truthful answers of what I found in my research. And you would think that that may form some part of the article if she's doing her journalistic job properly, because you're there to talk about, and she's there presumably to get a story of what you would think about the best and most balanced reporting of a UFO event, the largest UFO event in Europe, certainly in Britain, for this year. But what did we find? After the 3 days, there certainly was an article near the front of the newspaper. I think it was on page 20, and I have the article here with me now. But it's always been my contention that not just the Sun, but all major newspapers, if they can, will try to dumb down this subject. Now, to put this into context, when we read the article, you would think there may be kind of a summary, a little précis of all of the lecture speakers, or even a handful of them. But realistically, we don't. What we end up with, a headline of world powers will fake alien invasion at the Olympics closing ceremony to keep us living in fear, and a picture of Ian Crane, a well-known and prominent speaker who did an excellent lecture there. There's no real talk about his evidence to back why he says that is. Of the 40 minutes that I did with the lady, I get one reference, and I'll quote you the reference that I get, and I think it says, oh, there were many people there, and one of them was actually a police officer, serving police officer. So my 40 minutes of actual evidence about the best case in Britain's history doesn't even get mentioned at all, and there is just a subtle reference that it includes a police officer, as if to say, well, is this man mad? He believes in UFOs. But why do I believe in UFOs? It's never mentioned. Nobody looks at the evidence. So this is key. We had an abductee there called Brigitte Grant, who has come forward after many years to reveal her case and what happened to her. And this is a very emotive field, especially for the media. But because she'd been a page 3 model, she is then really the emphasis of the story. It doesn't talk to her about abductions, it's really the fact that she's an ex-page 3 model. And again, it strikes me that this is not what I would call good investigative reporting. It's dumbing down. They're not reporting on what the people are saying, the evidence that they're presenting. They're looking for a sensational aspect to kind of give you a headline that just dumbs it down to the people reading that newspaper. And they say that the Sun is something like 3 or 4 million people buy it, but with the knock-on effect that people that read it at work and pass it on, you may be reaching an audience of 10, 12 million people a day. So the paper is actually very, very influential. And if they are saying to the public on a often repeated basis, as do other major newspapers, that there's nothing to this subject, then quite rightly, it's not amazing to think that the general public are left thinking, well, there's probably not much to the subject.
I mean, you mentioned Bridget Grant, and I'm going to go a bit further than what you've said there, Gary, just for the record. Bridget Grant, for me, it's not the best abduction case. I've seen the evidence in it. She gets on platforms with Nick Pope, who will not publicly say that he thinks UFOs are real. And
remind us who Nick Pope is.
Nick Pope is the Ministry of Defence, ex-Ministry of Defence UFO desk man.
Between 91 and 94.
Okay. And for me, she's there, she's put up in the newspaper, she's a page 3 girl. So your average person, I'm not talking about every person, some people will look further at the information, but your average Sun reader will say, oh, she's talking about UFOs, she was taken about a UFO, okay, I don't believe that. But for me, there's another agenda at work. She's with Nick Pope, and I've actually shared this with her. So if she's watching, I'm sorry, but this is my opinion. I can't prove that she's either being used by the same people who are in control of Nick Pope, but that's what I suspect. So there you go, I've said it. So for me, that then allows them to control the information on abduction and abductees through someone whose story always gets put forward first before any of the other thousands of abduction cases, many of which are far more evidentially better than her case. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. Right, now,
that's your view, Richard.
That's my view, yeah, okay. Now, okay, so there was another piece in the Sun, Gary, that said that Nick Pope had his own little piece in that article, didn't he? Because it was written by a Sun journalist, but he added a little.
I think it was Nick Pope's influence that got the Sun interested in writing the article and getting the reporter down. Obviously, that's good that Nick can organise that through his media contacts, and I would argue that he's not in control of what the actual journalist says. So we have to thank him to get in the national newspapers to take interest.
Right.
And we can draw an inference that I think that the Sun didn't do a very good job of reporting it.
Yeah.
But there is something that I do want to say in relation to Nick Pope. because he is in the latter part of the article with a comment, which I found actually very disturbing. And I'll just read it. It's only a short paragraph.
Yep.
Can I read it?
Yep, sure.
Right.
Yep.
Now, Nick Pope comes on at the end, and this is what he wrote, and this is word for word what he wrote at the end of the Sun article that was printed on Monday the 8th of August. He said, exopolitics is what you might call the militant wing of the UFO community. These guys, brackets, and it's mostly guys, not only believe we are being visited by aliens, but think the government is covering up the truth. That makes them angry. A show of hands revealed that everyone in the room, apart from me, thought that 9/11 and 7/7 bombings were an inside job, perhaps as part of a plan to bring about some new world order. In the run-up to the 10th anniversary of the most deadly terrorist atrocity of all, and I will just paraphrase, he's referring to 9/11 obviously, I think the UFO lobby is playing a dangerous game. Well, when I read that, and I've met Nick Pope and shared many a platform with him, I was actually staggered by his comments, because he actively speaks at all of these conferences, as he did with Bridget Grant, who is an abductee, and it strikes me that Nick Pope has been in a very unique position for many, many years, and I'm not saying something I've not said to him privately and publicly, that because he ran the UFO desk between 1991 and 1994, he has a unique background as a political public servant, and was for many, over 20 years until he retired. But the point is that he's a trained politician, as all government people are, and that's what he did. And he speaks with a still very politically, very correct, very balanced view, which is not bad. However, on many occasions, he's speaking at UFO conferences with people that are clearly UFO believers because they've looked at the evidence. And I have talked privately with him, and he believes that UFOs are real and extraterrestrial. But whenever he is interviewed by the national media, or in national documentaries, major documentaries, or in national TV, he will never publicly go on the record and say, I believe UFOs are real. Now, I feel that that's a bit of an odd and a kind of a counterbalance. Now, for somebody that speaks at all of these conferences, I have never heard him say that we're a militant wing. Because if he's, because indirectly, if he's speaking at all the conferences that I speak at, then he's obviously a part of that militant wing. But is he? He's saying he isn't. Well, I've never thought of myself as a militant in any way at all. All I have ever tried to do is bring the facts of cases to the public as best I can, in the limited way that I can. And my research over 9 years is with police officers. And I now have a database that contains over 400 cases involving over 900 British police officers. But do the British media report on that? Less and less. Initially, when I started, they did. But now, the more the figures are, and more that you would think is more persuasive that UFOs, and there might be some reality to the subject, the less the media seem to show an interest. And so I was appalled by what he wrote there, and actually by the entire tone of the article that did not reflect much of the good work being done by serious US researchers from all over the world, many of whom have got degrees, and scientists who are publicly doing very good work. None of that is reported. And for him to say that we were a part of a militant wing, I was personally offended by that.
So you described the exopolitics UK movement as the militant wing of ufology.
And I think that the UFO lobby is playing a dangerous game. Well, he's a part of that lobby because he speaks at virtually every conference there is. So for him to say that, I personally took that as an insult, because I'm certainly not militant and far from it, because I think the way to portray this subject is to talk about the evidence, and that's all I actually do, Nick.
I mean, that would make me the militant wing of the militant wing.
It would, it would. And I think this is probably a good time to just mention the fact that at the end of the EXO conference at Leeds, we went to a question and answer session for all of the speakers, and the public who were the audience were allowed to ask so many questions and in the short time that remained. And a question was put to Nick that said, Nick, why do you think the UFO, the MOD closed the UFO desk in late 2009? And he gave an answer that basically said it was a cost-cutting exercise, and basically after 30 years there'd been no evidence to say there'd been anything of defence significance, etc. And to my mind, in fact, many researchers there wanted to really come back on that and what we thought was the real reason why, but unfortunately there wasn't the time. Now, if you'll allow me, can I just give you a brief summary as to why I think the MOD...
Why do you think the MOD closed its UFO desk?
Because it was being swamped with FOI requests, Freedom of Information requests, that many people were asking about UFOs. And I honestly believe that over the many, probably 40, 50 years that the UFOs had a reporting facility, and indirectly, if you examine the evidence of what they actually did, it was minimally staffed, and there was very little investigation done. And so to me, it was a public front. And the real reason why the MOD pulled the plug on it is not cost cutting. They said that, say, £55,000. Well, that's a spit in the big scheme of politics. It was about the fact that the FOI scheme that had been brought in for the general public as a whole to ask questions of the MOD was getting swamped with increasingly more and more numbers of UFO requests, and it was becoming a thorn in their side. And it's quite clearly an effort to move the problem in the same way that Project Blue Book became a hindrance to the US Air Force, and they sought a way to stop it. And if you look at this and examine the evidence, they were able to stop Project Blue Book by hiring the Condon Committee to do a report, which is a very flawed piece of research, widely condemned by all serious researchers. And on the strength of the negative report that the Condon Committee came up with, it was then a reason to close the desk. And it's a similar kind of issue here, I believe. More and more people were writing in, swamping the MOD researchers with requests for UFO information. And it ironically came at a time when the number of UFO reports in Britain was soaring for many, many years. For well over 10 years, these were the highest figures. I think 600-700 reports in 2008, along those figures, the highest numbers. And this, to me, was an absolute cop-out by Nick to say that it was just a government exercise to save a bit of money.
I mean, I'm not sure what the figures are on how many FOI requests they get, but it's a very high percentage of general FOI requests are UFO related.
Yeah, so that's a lot of people interested.
An embarrassing statistic for them, that's really the main subject that people are interested in getting information from, which suggests the public think they're being lied to and this information
touching on that, right, we have a major bit of confusion here, because touching on what you're saying is that we're saying that there's a lot of FOI requests related to UFOs, that it's something that people on the internet are regularly asking for information about. There's literally thousands and thousands of UFO websites. Whenever they've done major Gallup polls, whether it be anywhere around the world, about whether UFOs are coming here now, i.e. flying saucers are real and are extraterrestrial, the vast majority of them have always come back with very high percentages, often in excess of 70%, that say that people believe that UFOs are coming here now and of extraterrestrial origin. Now, we have a major problem because that's not reflected in the way the media deal with the subject. It's trivialised in the subject. Certainly in certain countries, certainly in the US, certainly in England, we've always followed America's lead. But if you go to South America, the Brazilian military are working with the Brazilian UFO researchers, and they are releasing their best reports that are concluding time after time after time. Air Force studies, UFOs, extraterrestrial in origin. This is not reported in the media. And this is classically showing this imbalance between what the real perceptions of the public are and what you are being told through the media, whether it be newspaper, radio or TV, documentary. You are led to believe that there is very little substance to this subject. And reality is, if there was ever a proper open embargo to lift the veil, and let's just concentrate on the best evidence, get rid of the stuff that we can disprove that's not relevant, and just concentrate on the best evidence, which is what I try to do, the best evidence, and inform the public would be amazed at just what is out there.
All right, and Gary, well, we're going to go for another break now, and we're going to discuss your own cases, which is the PRUFOS
police database.
The PRUFOS Police UFO database, after this break. Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary Heseltine, who is a police detective and a UFO researcher. Now then, Gary, before the break we mentioned that you have a website, which is PRUFOS. Can you give us the domain name first?
Yeah, well, the website is www.prufospolicedatabase.co.uk. PRUFOS standing for the acronym Police reported UFO sightings, and it's open for British police officers serving and retired.
Okay, so you collect sightings from police officers,
Yeah.
and some of them have come indirectly. Some of them are historical.
Yeah.
Others you've had reported directly to you.
Yeah, I mean they come from three main sources, directly from officers approaching me, through freedom of information requests, through as now is twice a year the government are releasing UFO files, which obviously you can search through, and obviously some have been historical UFO research from books and things like that.
So you've just produced another annual report.
Yeah,
so
I began my research in 2002. It was launched in January 2002 with an article in what was then UFO magazine, Graham Birdsall's UFO magazine, and each year I produce an annual report because that's the way it works with me as a detective. It's easier for me basically, and this year I've just finished the 9th report and I'm just typing it up as it were. But the significant thing is that when I began in 2002 I had 6 cases involving 12 officers, and I can now report that I now have over 400 cases involving British police officers going back to 1901, and it's now over 900 British police officers, which I think is a significant figure.
Yeah. Okay, so can you give us some of the most important points of the latest report?
Well, my latest case, my latest report will highlight, I think, in excess of, I think it's going to be 68 cases in the end, right. Which will add another 103 officers to the figures that we've already got. So this now takes us over 400 right. and over 900 officers. Many, more, probably 70% of the records, the reports this time will be as a result of the studying the perhaps 20,000 documents that have been released in the 2 batches of UFO files right. released by the MOD right. in February and August of this year.
So you go through those
every page,
and you look for police reported cases.
Yeah, because these are cases. The majority of the MOD files that come out are correspondence files, but in amongst those correspondence files you'll find some very interesting information. But several of the reports, several of the files will just be about citing themselves, members from the public. But if you go through there, you'd be surprised how many police officers are actually reporting things.
Right. And out of all of your data, have you come to any thoughts on geographically in the UK the different major areas?
Yeah.
Or is it just spread across?
No. I still think it's relatively early to get into deep statistics, and I'm not a big lover of statistics because I know that from my experience in the police you can manipulate just about any statistic you want. So I'm not a big lover of them in general. But what I can say is that I've done some statistical work, and the latest figures tie in pretty much with the figures last year. It's about 72% of all the cases that I have on the database are multiple corroborated cases, which is important because again the skeptics will try to say that it's an officer that's tired at 3 in the morning and he's just mistaken, he's seen a star, he's seen some atmospheric phenomena. Well, this kind of like disproves this because this is multiple officers seeing the same things. So 72% of over 400 cases, you work out the figures, that's well over probably just under 300 cases and multiple officer cases. I've got cases that are involving over 20 officers now. In fact, this year's research has highlighted that the famous Cosford incident, of which Nick Pope did actually a very good job in highlighting at his time when he was at the UFO desk from 1993, that now I've got more cases that I added last year that officers came to me that increased the numbers, and I think the figure now is it's around 26 police officers were involved in that incident over about 6 or 7 geographical forces.
In that one Cosford incident?
In that one Cosford incident, watching generally two UFOs moving parallel to each other across the sky and at various times being seen at low altitudes, 1,000, 2,000 feet.
This was hundreds of feet across, wasn't it?
Yeah, hundreds of feet across, and you know, that's backed up by an extremely important report from RAF Shawbury and one of the people in the air traffic tower who sees this object actually go over the runway.
I mean, my feeling on reported cases is that possibly areas of more mountainous terrain seem to be more prevalent. For example, Wales and certain parts of Scotland, and perhaps the Pennines, like the likes of Todmorden, and you've got Bonnybridge, and you've got
actually,
Brecon, and
just moving on from that, the statistical research that I've done based on last year, I've yet to do the statistical and add it to it, but I don't think it will be much different. Is that that Yorkshire itself, which is obviously quite a high Pennine area, is if you look at from a police point of view, there are three forces involved: North Yorkshire, West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire. If you were to add all of those cases together as a single county, like most are, then you would find that Yorkshire as a whole is by far the biggest reporter of police UFO sightings. Why that is, I don't know. There are some reasons why that is. There's a very famous case from Todmorden involving Alan Godfrey, who I worked closely with for a year and wrote a screenplay about what happened to him. Now, he introduced me to many other officers who confided in him, and I followed those up, so that's maybe why there's a slight increase there. But generally over Yorkshire is as a collectively is by far the biggest region in the UK. And
are there any cases which stand out for you, Gary, in
the
latest report?
I mean, when an officer comes to me and tells me of gigantic objects, which sometimes they do, and a case to point is an officer that's approached me this year, and I will probably, if you want, at some point do a detailed programme on some of the best cases on the database, because I think we're at that stage now where we can cherry pick and pull out some really fabulous cases where officers have come to me, and we'll maybe do that in the future. But just to highlight one case, there's a case where an officer basically is describing an object the size of 3 football fields. Now, we know how big a football field is. Imagine an object the size of 3 football fields that's seen low, moving silently, gigantic object, multiple officer corroborated, and that's one of the cases that's come in.
Was it triangular?
Off top, I think it is a triangular object.
See, it always worries me because if you look at, he's the guy called Ed Fouché. He has said that the TR-3B, alleged secret craft, that's how big it is, 600 feet. So, and it's triangular, silent, nuclear powered. So, but the question then arises, why would they be flying them around Yorkshire Dales, sort of thing,
Well, the point is that where this was seen was in an urban area. Over fields within a town. This is not a rural location. It's a fields, basically, football fields, and this is an urban environment. So. I don't know anything about whether we have developed triangular craft. I'm certain that we will have developed, and the Americans will have developed, stealth aircraft that we're not aware of. But the flight characteristics of stealth, fundamentally, and this is coming from Air Force experts, it's considerably different from what we know of UFO characteristics. And the general rule of thumb now, after 60 odd years of genuine UFO research, is that the UFOs have the ability to do instant stop, instant acceleration. They can make right angle turns, they can make instant reversals, so there they can go there and then they can come back on its own track. They can make vertical ascents at high speed and vertical descents. They can hover in total silence, be many hundreds of meters across, and they can, one of the most recent ones that I think we can add now is the fact that they have the ability to be radar invisible, not only to radar itself, but they have the ability, it would seem, to appear and disappear. There are many reports in my database where officers say that suddenly an object doesn't come into view, it flicks on and it's there, and then a few seconds later it goes. So to my mind, that as crazy as the idea of cloaking is, it's perhaps one of the best ways to describe how people describe, and these are police officers, rational people, corroborated multiple officer cases where officers are saying that suddenly an object appears in front of them, it's there, it's large, you can't mistake it, it's close to them, and then suddenly moments later or 5 minutes later and it blinks out, disappears. Now, I don't think we have yet developed the stealth capability to do any of those things.
And the Godfrey case is a very famous police abduction case. I mean, do you get wind of any other abduction phenomena cases through your work, or is it all just
there are perhaps another 3 or 4 officers that I've spoken to who have been so traumatised by incidents that have happened to them that they don't want to explore that area, maybe go under hypnosis, because they're kind of fearful of what they might uncover.
Right.
But they've had sightings where they've been with other officers. There has been aspects of missing time, which is a phenomenon associated with genuine abduction scenario. But when confronted with, well, do you want me to pursue this further and put you in touch with people who can hypnotise you? Basically, they've taken, no, we'll leave it for that for now. Now, I don't take that they're lying. I just think that it's a very painful thing, as it is for many abductees, to actually contemplate that has happened to them, and they don't want to explore whether it has or it hasn't.
Yeah.
So I've got to respect that.
Yeah, I mean, I have had a recent abduction case reported to me via my website, and I've referred that to Dave Hodrian. And he's now looking
Birmingham
into
group,
the Birmingham group, and he's now looking into
and he's
that.
doing an excellent job.
So that looks like a genuine case from everything I've learned thus far.
The reality is that my take on UFOs is that I do believe that a small proportion of UFO sightings are extraterrestrial in origin. I think that's easily demonstrated if you put the best evidence cases out there. And so I try to do that. I draw inference to the best cases and highlight the ones that are backed up by radar, multiple visual, airborne, ground radar, those kind of things. That is absolutely solid data that you could present in an evidence in the court of law. That's where I come from. Unfortunately, the way the media look at the subject of UFOs, if you randomly say to a member of the public, what do you think about abductees and alien abduction, the majority will probably think you're just a nutter, because it's too big a leap. And I believe that the way to draw people into the subject is to talk about the factual stuff that's well documented, well researched, that says, you know, a plane was seen, it was followed by a UFO for 200 miles, it was on airborne ground radar, multiple
It was the
aircraft,
size of the Albert Hall.
you know, and that kind of thing. And then once you've introduced people to the fact that there are some very credible cases, then you can say, well, actually under the umbrella is things like animal mutilations, which is a factor. You can look at crop circles, definitely falls under the banner, although 99% of them are man-made, but there is a phenomena there. And then you can look at the abduction side, which I believe, and I was sceptical at first, but after 9 years of research, I do believe that there is a proportion of people that are being abducted.
And you looked very closely at the Alan Godfrey case.
Absolutely, that was the first one I'd ever dealt with.
And you've seen all the hypnosis tapes.
I'm very privileged that Harry Harris, the guy who filmed these events and who set up the hypnosis sessions with 2 professors from Manchester University, basically, when I began to research the case in 2002, I think it was the first year of my research, he lives in West Yorkshire, I live in West Yorkshire, it seemed the logical thing to do. I said, Harry, will you let me view the material? He's very guarded with it, and I'm probably one of the very few people who've seen the whole tapes. But I watched 3 of the 4 regressions because the first one wasn't recorded, the last 3 were, and made detailed notes. I did it on my own, I kicked him out of his living room, and I looked at it through a police officer, and the only thing that comes from that is he makes mannerisms and does movements. I'm good at body language. I'm an advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses, so I'm good at the psychology side of things and on body language in particular. And he does things that if he's a liar, then he deserves an Oscar. And that's what I'll say.
Right. Okay, and what about the future for you, Gary? Because you've got retirement in a couple of years' time?
Well, I could go on for many more years, but I'm hoping that if all goes to plan financially, that in 2013 then I'll retire and then devote my energies into UFO research in a more bigger way. Hopefully I'll have a book out coming in at that time about my police cases, because there's more than enough material there if I can get a publisher. So if there's anybody out there, please let me know. But yeah, I'm trying to push the Rendlesham Forest case, not because I want to sell out and make loads of money to Hollywood. I think you could do that with this story, but I won't do that for the simple reason that I want it to be an actual factual reporting of the case, because the elements that's contained within it stand up as fantastic evidence on their own.
I mean, we were talking about this earlier about you've written a film script, a screenplay as you call it. You've actually discussed that with people in the industry. And then you've adapted it according to their requirements because it didn't have a central character. So you've added a sort of taxi driver who's a central character.
I basically took it to a Hollywood producer who was involved and has got a big interest in the UFO phenomenon, genuine interest. And because what we have with Rendlesham is we don't have a central heroic figure who runs over the 3 days. It's an ensemble piece. And he basically came back and said, I know you won't want to do this and be reluctant to do this, but it may be a good way to create a character, a factual kind of base character that can be there, who can link the incidents. So that's what I did, with some trepidation, but I did it, and that's where we are at the moment. And I'm currently talking to somebody else who is who's made films, and so whether I'm involved or not, sooner or later this film will be made. The question is, how is it going to be made? And if I'm involved, then it will be told properly, and it won't be a Hollywood exploitation.
I mean, that's the thing with the Hollywood. You can count on no hands the amount of historical factual stories that they've reported, that they've done represented correctly. You know,
I mean, Fire in the Sky, the Travis Walton story wasn't bad until it got within the craft, and then it went into Hollywood science fiction.
It was just like, you know.
But that's probably the closest in terms of the way it was reported in the police and the way that they portrayed the town's reaction, the police's reaction, and there was suspicion on the people with Travis who left him behind, as it were.
Maybe the new character that they wanted you to add, maybe he could be the lighthouse operator, looking at the UFO coming in through his binoculars, and that would debunk that theory.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people who say that the lighthouse actually wasn't focusing its beam that way, but and the reality is that the person in the weapons storage tower would have known where the lighthouse was 365 days of the year, every single minute of the day. So why would he be surprised by the lighthouse? And in fact, I've actually done a little bit of work with Holt recently when he came over for a documentary, and I took him back out through there and took him to areas of the forest and retraced his steps and discovered where the creek that it refers to on the tape, and that's part of something I'm putting together as well with Holt to actually redress the balance, because in all the documentaries he's taken part in, guess how many times he'd ever been back to Rendlesham and through the forest and across the farmer's field and found the creek.
He'd not been there.
He'd never.
Okay.
He'd done it once years ago.
I mean,
nobody had ever gone back all those years later. Now that to me again is, if they're trying to tell a real evidential story of what's good at Rendlesham, they should have done that in every documentary, and they never have, because they're not bothered, because they've got their own agenda to work to, and the bottom line is, let's keep the bottom conclusion will be, we'll have a bit of good stuff, a bit of bad stuff, and we'll leave the public as confused as ever.
I mean, as you said though, it probably will get made.
Certainly
a Hollywood film or a big film about Rendlesham.
It's a question of how it's made.
You know, they could just completely ignore you, and you're going to be pulling your hair out if that's at the cinema.
The reality is,
you're going to go and sit and watch it.
You know, I mean, there are films made about the abduction phenomena in TV series, and unfortunately there have been very poor representations of actually what happens in the abduction scenario, and so it's nothing like. And so, if you know, that's my fear. But all I can say to the people who keep asking me where are we at the moment is, I'll certainly keep you informed. I'm certainly not going to sell out for big bucks. I do believe it will get made. Hopefully I am going to be involved, because I will tell a truthful story, because the facts are so good you couldn't write them.
All right, and Gary, well, thanks very much. Fascinating as usual.
You're welcome.
And you know, good luck with all of your work, and I hope you get your script into a Hollywood film. That would be
well, that's my ambition.
Okay.
Because it has this case, the Rendlesham Forest case, has the ability to widely change the general public's perception of the subject in one foul swoop. It can do what researchers have been trying to achieve for 30, 40 years.
All right, and Gary, thanks very much. And it just remains for me to say, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.
into 5 more silent UFOs that disappear. Then multiple UFOs are seen off the base, near the base, and eventually UFOs shine a beam down at their feet, the group of 5 airmen, including Holt, before one of the UFOs is then later seen and corroborated via other people in the radar in the weapon storage tower, that beams were being shone directly into the weapon storage area, which I can confirm is a nuclear storage facility.
Right. Now, recently I saw a new UFO film by Leslie Keane, I think it is, and Holt gave his testimony in that film, and he actually drew a picture of the UFO that he witnessed, which was different to what Penniston witnessed.
Absolutely.
Now, I think you can get that on the net. I think it's called Secret Access UFOs. Very good documentary if you want to look that one up. Now, okay, when we were at this exopolitics conference, you gave your talk on Rendlesham, all of the evidence, etc., etc. And then I think it was just after your talk, someone taps me on the shoulder and hands me a copy of the Daily Telegraph. And there's a big article all about Rendlesham. The commander of the base, i.e. Holt's boss,
Ted Conrad,
Ted Conrad, has come forward, and he's making statements, basically negative statements, I guess, not having spoken publicly about this event for, how long is it, 41 years?
30 years.
30 years. 30 years.
So he was the one who actually instructed Holt to go out and assemble a team and get out there. But interestingly, from Colonel Holt, he says that there was a chat with a Major Ziegler, who was the head of the security police aspect, the Office of Special Investigations, which is like the CID of the US Air Force Police, and he was actually involved in a conversation with Conrad, who then approaches Holt and says, we would like you to take Sergeant Ball with you as well. And Holt says, okay. So it would strike me that Ted Conrad's recollections perhaps are not quite as accurate as they could be.
Right. Now, why would he suddenly make a statement not having spoken out for all this time? I mean, they've clearly dragged him out of retirement to make this statement. I mean, have you spoke to Holt about it, and what does Holt think about it?
Well, I have spoken to Holt about it, and he has his own thoughts, which he, I think, went to great lengths to address at the time, to actually counter what he'd said, and he more or less said what I've said, that he's got a short memory. But I think that's better for Holt to say it. Suffice to say that we both are of the opinion that for some reason, I don't think it's particularly a coincidence that Conrad came out with his comments just at the time when I am actually making an evidential review through my experience as a police officer, showing you the best evidence.
Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. On today's show we have a serving police detective who is also a UFO researcher. He spoke recently at the UK Exopolitics Conference in Leeds and is soon to be speaking on a lecture tour in Denmark for the Danish Exopolitics group. We are here in West Yorkshire in late October, and we've decided to brave the weather and come outside and conduct the interview here. So welcome, Gary.
Good morning to you.
Now then, I mentioned there the Exopolitics Conference at which we both spoke in August 2011. Now, your talk was all about the Rendlesham Forest incident, which we spoke about last time. Can you, first off, because we're going to discuss a little bit of the politics behind the Rendlesham case, because there's quite a lot of...
And there are a lot of politics.
Firstly, can you give us the salient points, as briefly as you can, the timeline of events and who the key witnesses were?
Okay. Basically, after 4 years of research,
and that was quite a coincidence that it was at the same time as the Exopolitics Conference. But tell us what was said in that article and what your reaction to it was?
Well, basically, I was surprised, although nothing surprises me in the UFO world and the way the media portray this subject after 9 years of research.
Yeah.
But basically, he did a very negative article saying that after 31 years, he'd finally agreed to speak, and basically he said there was nothing to it, and kind of like just trivialised what went on. He said that something went on, but he didn't really think it'd amount to anything. He didn't really say anything of note, it was just generalisations. Well, that obviously made a lot of newspapers, and in fact it pretty much makes all the newspapers. Anything to do with Rendlesham that is of a negative angle seems to just go around the internet and on newspaper websites like wildfire. But actually the best evidence about Rendlesham rarely ever gets a mention, and there's an irony there which I think we'll touch on a bit later. But just to clear up the matter, I know from my collaboration with Colonel Holt that actually Ted Conrad, his memory perhaps is somewhat a bit elusive, because it was actually Ted Conrad that was there on the same night, the Christmas party, when Holt is told that the UFO's back. Well, Ted Conrad was there when that was told, my Bruce, Lieutenant Bruce England. And it was actually Conrad who said to Holt, I want you to go out and sort this out once and for all. Having met Colonel Holt, who was then the Deputy Base Commander of the base in 1980 when the incidents occurred, I've collaborated with him and I've done an evidential review, and that's what my talk was, basically through police eyes and evidential review. The key salient points of that we can establish after 30 years is that there were 3 successive nights of UFO activity. On the first night, principally, there was a UFO seen that was then tracked through the forest and then was seen to be on the ground, i.e. a landed UFO. 2 officers approached that craft, one of which actually touched it, which was Sergeant Jim Penniston, and he made numerous drawings, was around the craft for many minutes, detailed drawings. The second significant night is less well known, but I'm now happy to believe that that is corroborated. A number of officers have come forward in the last 2 or 3 years to corroborate that the second night occurs, and this involves in a Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin, who was out on mobile patrol when she has an encounter with a UFO, which is so frightening to her that she has to be relieved from duty and take time off. The third night is perhaps the most famous night, because this is the night that involves Colonel Holt, where the UFOs return and he takes a team of specialist officers out with him. They track UFO through the forest, where it then divides.